What's the one piece of advice you wish you had received as a first-time CEO?
Be yourself. I think that so much of our ego and our identity is tied into the titles that we have at work. And 9 out of 10 CEOs I talk to have imposter syndrome. Ultimately, it really comes down to understanding what's important to you. If it is important to you, you will make it happen. You can carve out time and make it meaningful.
You've successfully grown businesses like AOL Local and CVAS to over 50 million and 100 million in revenue, respectively. What strategies or frameworks do you recommend for SMBs looking to scale?
I think that, and David, you mentioned it, and I'm going to keep coming back to it, is what's the problem that we're trying to need to solve right now? And I think so often there are, when SMB or any business really has a million problems to solve, but let's pick one. Let's pick one about growing revenue and scaling. Okay, great. Do we know who our customer is? Who is our customer? And let's really be clear about who we are building for and who can buy and should and will buy from us. Just shedding 80% of the market or 90% of the market to focus on who our best customer is probably step number one. We waste time talking to prospects and leads that are never going to buy, and if they buy, they're never going to renew, and if they renew, they're not going to be happy about it, and they're going to be a pain in the ass. So we all know who those customers are. So getting locked in on who our customer is really important. The second is to understand how pricing and packaging can work for our business, but also, I believe, align with our customers as well. We know that we want to acquire a customer and we want to deliver value, and we want that to grow over time, value to the customer and value to us. So finding a clear, easy way in a pricing and packaging model so people can purchase quickly, because if you can't understand it on a napkin or in a, just tell me what the price is, then it's going to be really hard to be successful. And then once you have the customer and the pricing and packaging model set up, you need to understand what are the resources you need to make that happen, to bring that product to market and to sell it and to support it. And that's picking your go-to-market strategy. Is it self-service and product-led? Is it an inside sales force? Is it an outside sales force? Is it channels? Those are all decisions you can make based on the pricing that you have and your ability to do it. But it all comes back to, I'll add a little bit to what it comes back to, but it all comes back to picking the problem and then getting GSD, getting stuff done, like get moving on it. You will be wrong, but you will learn with new data and activity. Activity always wins the day.
Yeah. The data you get from being wrong is way more data than you can get from sitting on the sidelines. For SaaS companies, what do you think are the biggest mistakes CEOs make in go-to-market strategies, and how can they avoid them?
I think pricing is a huge mistake that people make. They overcomplicate it. I'm guilty as charged 80 times. Underpricing is probably the biggest mistake people make. At Bitly was a great example. When we started and decided we needed to get profitable and get moving, I'd like to tell you that we did a ton of research and data analysis at the start. We did later once we scaled and we were a real big business. But then when we were, $1 million a year in recurring revenue, we more or less picked an easy pricing model and said it starts at $1,000 a month. And we had one or two add-ons, but that was it. And I can tell you that the team told me I was crazy. I vividly remember a salesperson saying, "Mark, nobody's ever going to pay $1,000 for this." Fast forward 3 months later, he was doing $1,500 a month deals, $2,000 a month deals. So set your price high. You can always lower it. It's hard to raise it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes you actually beat your competition by increasing your prices. The kind of first instinct is to lower your prices, to undercut your competitors, to make it seem more accessible. But you mentioned earlier something interesting. Everybody wants to win. And usually that means working with the best. And so the best is associated with sometimes the most expensive. Of course, you have to back it up. I'm not saying, sell peanut butter for $1 million. Well, maybe you should. I don't know. But it's interesting, kind of getting comfortable with that mindset. And it also gives you, I think, a high bar to live up to. If you have a low bar to live up to, that doesn't really do anyone any favors.
A lesson that I've learned the hard way a couple of times is when you price really low, your top of funnel gets really big because people think that they can achieve, they can buy and they can work it. But people who don't, let me say it this way: you want to sell to people who have budgets and can afford to spend money and expect to spend money. If you price too low, you end up talking to people who don't have budgets, who don't have authority, and who think, okay, it's interesting, it's possible, but they're not professional buyers. So unless we're talking about a consumer product, which we can, and that's different, but in a B2B SaaS particularly, it is easier to sell $1 million worth of software than it is $1,000 worth of software. Because when you're selling $1 million piece of software, and I'm speaking in general terms, there is a budget that often has $1 million in it to be spent, a process by which they evaluate vendors and solutions, a procurement team that is set up to negotiate and review contracts, and a buying process that's set in stone. When you're an SMB selling to an SMB, it can be really difficult because there is not that budget, not the process, and you're taking the money out of someone's pocket versus out of a company's allocated budget. So budget up, price up, and go after people who can afford it.
You've emphasized, even in our conversation here, about maintaining balance in your coaching philosophy, and CEOs trying to balance so many things in their life, hobbies and personal relationships, as well as things related more to the business. How can CEOs juggle the pressures of growth with personal well-being?
Yeah, it's really hard. I wish I could tell you that it was easy. I still don't have a hobby. I do the crossword puzzle, but that doesn't count because it's too quick, meaning I can't spend hours doing it. But I think ultimately it really comes down to understanding what's important to you and what is most important. There's been times in my career when the most important thing was my job. I'm now married with 3 almost adult children, and my priorities are different and have been different. Then it was about my family. It's been about my family and about my friends. So I think it starts with understanding what your priorities are. It really helps if you are thoughtful about it ahead of time. If you set a priority that says, I want to have some modicum of balance in my life. I want to afford myself some time to be with my partner, or I want to be physically fit, then you can plan to make those things happen. When I was a first-time CEO and scaling and running our business, my wife had said to me, hey, it's really important that we have a date night. So we had a date night every Saturday night. It was on my calendar. It's not romantic to say, but it was literally on my calendar. And we had a babysitter that showed up at 6:00 every Saturday night. Lucky to be able to do that. And some nights we went out to dinner. Some nights we went to the movies. Some nights we went grocery shopping. But we did it every Saturday night, and we would do that. Another ritual. I'm a huge believer in rituals. And I learned this from my dad, who was an entrepreneur as well. I would leave in the morning before the kids were up, the boys were up, and I would get home and they would have already done their homework or not, and done their stuff. And if I was lucky, I could read to them when they went to bed, but it was rare. But every Saturday morning, I would get up and take the boys to the diner. And it would either be the 2 of us, the 3 of us, or the 4 of us, as we had our third kid. And we would have, they knew to look forward to going to the diner for breakfast on Saturday mornings. That turned into making breakfast at home, as they got a little older, but setting aside the time for the things that matter to you and making them a priority, and then they will happen. If it is important to you, you will make it happen. You can carve out time and make it meaningful. You don't have to do it all because you can't, but find the things that matter and prioritize them and stick to them. That's my advice.
It's also interesting how sometimes taking a step away from the business makes you more effective when you return. Could you talk about how personal interest and downtime can help recharge CEOs and help them stay effective?
Yeah, there's no doubt that that's true, and the research supports it. And I think exercise and taking care of yourself physically and emotionally is really important. The way the brain works for many people, not everybody, for many people, is that your brain will parallel process and work on problems in the background while you are doing other things. This is true. So for me, it's running. So I know that when I actually step away and go running and I focus on the running, and then my brain will pop up and be like, oh, okay, I'll get some clarity on the problem. This happens to some people in the shower. It happens to me when I'm running. Actually taking your brain away from the screen or the problem that you're looking at right now and freeing it from that, it will continue to work in the background. This happens to me with crossword puzzles, actually. The first time I read a clue, I have no idea what the answer is going to be. When I come back around the second time or the third or the fourth, sometimes it'll pop. So I think it's about giving yourself, if for people who are reluctant to go for the run or to give themselves the time away to take care of themselves physically or emotionally, I would encourage them to think about it as hacking the business, because they are going to take care of themselves, and it'll turn out that they will actually find some solutions when they get away from their keyboard as well.
I like that, hacking the business. You help entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes that you've made. What's one mistake you think CEOs are likely to repeat, and how can they avoid it?
Gosh, I'm having a little bit of flashbacks to all the mistakes that I've made. I think the mistake that is often made is people are avoiding the real conversation that they need to have. That can be micro, can be with somebody on your team, it can be with an investor, it can be with yourself. And it gets back to, David, everything we've been talking about, which is understanding the real problem that's in front of you and the facts around it. So it's much easier to smile and laugh, think that your team knows what you want them to do, because it's easier than saying, hey, I need you to do this. And I love you as a person, but unless you get to this number, the business isn't going to get what it needs. So I think avoiding the real conversations is a trap I see a lot of CEOs falling into.
Your website is markjosephson.net. People can go there to find out more about your coaching approach and the blogs that you mentioned. What's one thing that you hope SMB CEOs take away from this conversation?
I hope they take away that they can do it, that it is possible, and they have the power within them to make that happen. It's not a magic trick. They can do this.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me today. It's a very impressive career you had and great work that you're doing.
Thanks, David. I've enjoyed every minute.